which is the room right over here on the west end of the church building. And the easiest way to get in there is just to go in that end door. And that way you don't have to worry about cutting through the church. Of course, if you park on the other side of the church in the east parking lot, then you'll have to cut through. We do ask if you go look at the sanctuary not to walk on the tile. The thin set should be pretty much dry, but I'm sure the tile guys would appreciate it if you don't walk on it. And in the weeks to come, as hopefully they'll be done before when I say weeks, but in the days to come, just be careful as you go through there that you're conscious of the fact that something may be just put down, it may be fresh, the thin set may not, the grout may not be dry or something of that nature. And you walk across some tile and the tile moves a little bit and the guys are trying to do a nice job and they come in the next morning, now it's hardened up and they got to chisel it out. And so just be conscious of that if you would, but do take a peek. Also remember that sometimes things can be slippery or there could be things on the floor that you could trip over or step on. They're trying to keep it pretty clean, and they're doing a great job at that. But just be aware of that, especially ladies. So I know sometimes ladies wear, hard leather shoes that are very slick on the bottom, and so we don't want anyone tripping and falling or slipping and falling while they're over there looking at the floor. Wow, what a great sanctuary! We'll just slain in the spirit. There you go. Okay. No. But anyways. Well, if you have your Bibles with you this morning, do open them, please, to 2 Samuel chapter 19 as we continue our study on the life of David. This morning, I specifically want to talk about friends and friendships and how they can change your life. David had numerous close friends in his life that helped him in many different ways. A couple of the more recent friends that we've studied, as you may well remember, first of all, are Jonathan. Jonathan was Saul's son and probably one of the best friends that David had up until the day that he died in battle with his father. Jonathan, that is, died with his father in battle. In 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 1, David asked, "Is there anyone still left of the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake?" And so David remembered the covenant that he had made with Jonathan when Jonathan said, "Listen, when you become king, I know that someday, because Samuel the prophet has anointed you king, I know that someday you will take my father's place. That my dad will no longer be king and you will. And when that day comes, please remember our friendship. And be merciful to us." Because in those days, oftentimes when somebody would come to authority, when they would become the king, they would eliminate the predecessor's family. Any perceived or real threat to the throne would be put to death. It's still that way in some countries around the world, where when somebody comes to power, if they perceive that somebody else is a threat to them, they either have them arrested or they disappear and nobody ever finds them again. And so David remembered his covenant with Jonathan, and here it tells us that he asked after Jonathan's death, "Is there anyone I can still show kindness to? Anyone still left of the house of Saul?" Ziba, one of Saul's servants, told David that Jonathan had a crippled son named Mephibosheth. And so David showed great kindness to Mephibosheth because of his friendship with Jonathan. And then even more recently, you remember we took a look at a man named Hushai. And we don't know a lot about Hushai other than he was a counselor of King David, but he was more than a counselor. Ahithophel was also a counselor, but Hushai is said in two different places in the Scripture to be a friend of David's. In 2 Samuel chapter 15, verse 37, it says, "So David's friend Hushai arrived at Jerusalem as Absalom was entering the city." And you remember Hushai actually is there sort of as a spy to find out what the plans of Absalom are so that he can warn King David of what Absalom, the rebellious son of David, what he was going to do in order to try to rob David of his kingdom. And so he proved to be a great help to David, and he did that because of their friendship. Many of you, I trust, have some friends that have helped you from time to time. Even if it's just a word of encouragement, a time of prayer, talking to you about the Lord, giving you some sort of counsel or direction in life. And I hope that you treasure those friendships. Today we will read about Barzillai, the Gileadite, and how he befriended David and helped him during a low point in David's life. And as we do so, I hope that it helps to foster within us the desire to make friends and to be a friend. We'll see how David remembered this friend and what he did because of his friendship. We'll also look briefly at other verses and ways that friends can help each other. In Proverbs chapter 27, verse 10, it says, "Do not forsake your friend and the friend of your father, and do not go to your brother's house when disaster strikes you. Better a neighbor nearby than a brother far away." Do not forsake your friend. This is a wise teaching of the Scriptures. It's a Proverbs. It's one of the collections of Solomon, and there is wisdom in this proverb. And we see that David was that type of man that did not forsake his friend. And especially in relationship to this man named Barzillai, the Gileadite from Rogelim. Now, what a name, Barzillai. When you read that, I think the guy must have been Italian, but no, he was Middle Easterner. He's actually from one of the nations that Israel was told to drive out of the land, but Israel didn't do that completely. And this guy was one of the guys that was one of the chieftains of the area northeast of the Jordan River. This is one of the people that helped David as he fled across the Jordan to escape possible death at the hands of his son Absalom. And so we're going to read about him this morning. I want to back up a little bit before we read the current passage that we're going to look at this morning. I want to back up to the passage where we see how this man showed friendship to David. And so I'm going to ask you to hold your finger in 2 Samuel chapter 19 and turn back to 2 Samuel chapter 17. 2 Samuel chapter 17, verses 27 through 29. It says, "When David came to Mahanaim, Shobi, the son of Nahash, from Rabbah of the Ammonites, and Machir, son of Ammiel, from Lo-debar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite, from Rogelim, brought bedding and bowls and articles of pottery. They also brought wheat and barley, flour and roasted grain, beans and lentils." I'd rather have corn on the cob and steak, but honey and curds, sheep and cheese from cow's milk, for David and his people to eat. For they said, "The people have become hungry and tired and thirsty in the desert." 3 chieftains of that area of Mahanaim came to the aid of David and his men in order to help them replenish their strength by feeding them and meeting some of their needs. Imagine how things might have turned out differently had they not done that, as Absalom and his troops came after David and his men. It's one thing to go to battle fresh with whatever strength you have and well-nourished and able to fight because you've got energy to fight. It's another thing to go into battle exhausted and malnourished and hungry. And so these 3 people here that we're reading about, which we just sort of gloss over as we read this. Okay, yeah, they brought them a lot of food. That's good. Now remember, there's thousands of people as well. So this was an expensive indenture. These men basically took a lot of personal loss in order to supply the needs of David and the thousands that followed him. You say, how do you know there were thousands? Because it tells us that David took 3 of his leaders of his army, Joab being one of them, and divided them up by thousands and then by hundreds. So we're talking a lot of food here. We're talking a lot of lentils, a lot of grain, a lot of beans, a lot of honey and curds and a lot of milk. And yet they did this to help David out. And David does not forget this. And so now we move to 2 Samuel chapter 19. After David is successful in defeating Absalom, which, of course, you remember the story, had a lot to do with Joab putting Absalom to death as he hung in the forest by a tree. His hair or his head apparently caught in one of the tree limbs, and Joab puts him to death, and then the battle basically ceases. Why does it cease? Because the leader of the opposition is dead. I always thought, if you go to battle, man, go for the chief guy, right? Shoot the commanding officer. Shoot the people in charge. That, to me, is what makes sense. I read a great story one time, and it's just a little bunny rabbit trail, but about George Washington as he was leading the troops in the against the French and the Indians, and how the Indians were shooting at him and trying to kill him while he was on his horse. And maybe you've heard the story, apparently a true story, and he's riding back and forth. 3 horses were shot out from underneath George Washington. There were 2 or 3 bullet holes in his cloak, and yet not a single bullet hit him because of the providence of God. But those Indians knew what to do in battle, and using the guns that they were supplied with, they're trying, kill the guy in charge, kill the guy in charge. They just couldn't do it. Well, Joab knew how to end a battle. Kill the guy in charge. He killed Absalom. Ended the battle. The battle's over. David now can return back to Jerusalem. There's no more threat. And he doesn't have to worry about innocent people dying because of his sin. Remember, all of this is ultimately the result of his sin with Bathsheba and the murder of her husband, Uriah the Hittite. Nathan the prophet said, because of what you've done, the sword will never depart from your house. And so Absalom's rebellion against his father, David, was a result of David's sin. But now, that's over with. At least that part of the struggle in David's family. And so David is free to go back. And as he's getting ready to cross back over the Jordan River to go back to Jerusalem, we read this in 2 Samuel 19, verses 31 through 40. And you can't probably read it on the overhead. The print may be too small, but I hope you have your Bibles. Follow along with me if you would. It says, Barzillai the Gileadite also came down from Rogelim to cross the Jordan with the king and to send him on his way from there. Now Barzillai was a very old man, 80 years of age. He had provided for the king during his stay in Mahanaim, for he was a very wealthy man. And that's what we read about earlier in 2 Samuel chapter 17. The king, that is David, said to Barzillai, cross over with me and stay with me in Jerusalem, and I will provide for you. So already he's expressing his gratitude. He's saying, listen, Barzillai, you have been a good friend to me. You have taken care of me and my men. You have allowed us to become victorious. Come back to Jerusalem with me. Stay with me. I'll take care of all your needs. But Barzillai says in verse 34 that he answered the king, how many more years will I live, that I should go up to Jerusalem with the king? I am now 80 years old. Can I tell the difference between what is good and what is not? Can your servant taste what he eats and drinks? Can I still hear the voices of men and women singers? In other words, he say, hey, my senses are failing. I can't hear anymore. I can't see anymore. I can't taste things anymore. Anybody identify with that, right? That's what happens as we get older, right? Can't taste things, see things, or hear things. And he's saying, why? I'm getting old. I'm going to die. Why change homes now? Why go to a different place now? After all, he wasn't destitute. He didn't have to. And so he goes on. And he says, your servant, verse 36, or why should your servant be an added burden to my lord the king? Your servant will cross over the Jordan, verse 36, with the king for a short distance. But why should the king reward me in this way? Let your servant return, that I may die in my own town, near the tomb of my father and mother. But here is your servant Kinham. Let him cross over with my lord the king. Do for him whatever pleases you. Apparently Kinham was a faithful servant to Barzillai, and Barzillai wanted to reward him for his faithfulness and felt, well, David, if you really want to do something for me, do something for this young man. He's still young. You can reward him in my place. Do for him whatever pleases you. Verse 38, the king said, Kinham shall cross over with me, and I will do for him whatever pleases you. And anything you desire from me, I will do for you. So all the people crossed the Jordan, and the king crossed over. The king kissed Barzillai and gave him his blessing, and Barzillai returned to his home. Now flip over, again, hold your finger here for a second and flip over to 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 7. So David offers to reward Barzillai for his friendship. And probably doesn't simply offer to reward him. He probably really likes the guy. He probably would like to have this guy there. He's proven to be a faithful friend in times of adversity. He's taken out of his own resources and out of his own wealth great expenses to feed the troops and to feed David, to feed his men, to feed his counselors, to feed their families. And he's thinking, I'm guessing he's thinking to himself, man, this is the kind of friend I want to have around me. Come on back with me, man. But the guy says, no, I'm too old to do that. Take Kinham and do whatever you would like with him. Reward him instead. Let him be your friend. David remembers the actions of Barzillai later on in his life as he's about to die. In 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 5. 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 5. David speaking to his son Solomon, he says, now you yourself know what Joab, the son of Zeruiah, did to me, what he did to the two commanders of Israel's armies, Abner, son of Ner, and Amasa, son of Jether. He killed them, murdered them is what he did. He killed them, shedding their blood in peacetime as if in battle. And with that blood stained the belt around his waist and the sandals on his feet. Deal with him according to your wisdom, but do not let his gray head go down to the grave in peace. Verse 7, but show kindness to the sons of Barzillai of Gilead, and let them be among those who eat at your table. They stood by me when I fled from your brother Absalom. David recognizes still at this point in his life how great a friend Barzillai had been. And he tells his son Solomon, hey, you carry on what I started. Remember the sons of Barzillai and be kind to them. Let them be among those who eat at your table. Meet their needs. Take care of them. Their dad was a friend to me. You be a friend to their sons. Proverbs 27 verse 10 may not have been collected by Solomon yet, but it may well have been a proverb that existed at David's time, or David simply understood the value of friendship. Proverbs 27:10 was that verse that we read earlier that says, do not forsake your friend and the friend of your father. I know you're saying to yourself, okay, now that's great. Yep, we see Barzillai was a good friend to David. David returned the favor, and he took care of Barzillai's sons. So what's that to me? I'm not a king. I don't need people to take care of me, to supply my needs. Nobody's chasing after me. I don't have a rebellious son that's trying to kill me. I hope not anyways. Take the throne from me. You know, I can meet my own needs. I work a job. I can meet my own needs. I don't really need anybody. In fact, I just sort of enjoy being by myself, and, you know, I don't want to have to worry about friends and making friends or being a friend. Well, let me give you 7 good scriptural reasons. 7 good scriptural reasons for having friends and for being a friend. Now, I'm going to talk about basically having friends, why it's good to have friends, but in the process, I hope you can apply that to your life in the sense of not only do we want to have friends, but we ought to be a friend. Right? We ought to be the friend to somebody else that we want someone to be to us. And so here's 7 things. Friends, first of all, can provide companionship. Friends can provide encouragement. Friends can provide support and help in times of need. Friends can provide guidance. Friends can save our job, our reputation, our family in some situations. Friends can save our lives in some situations. And friends should be remembered and reciprocated when possible. First off then, friends provide companionship. In Proverbs 17:17, and I can't help but wonder if Solomon wasn't influenced by his dad's friends and the loyalty that David showed to his friends, even as we've already read how he told Solomon, remember Barzillai and take care of his sons. And then Solomon collects all of these proverbs, and in the proverbs there are quite a few of them that deal with friendship. One of them is this verse here, Proverbs 17:17. It says, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. Now I'm referring to real, genuine friends when I talk about friends. There are friends who are only friends as long as they have something to gain or get from you. The Proverbs talk quite a bit about that as well. Solomon wants us to be aware of the fact that there are people who will pretend to be your friends, or maybe even will sort of, semi-genuinely be your friend as long as they can get something out of it. Like what Proverbs 14:20 says, the poor are shunned even by their neighbors, but the rich have many friends. Why do the rich have many friends? Because they can feed you, and they can give you gifts at Christmas time, and they can throw the parties, and they got the swimming pool you can jump in and swim with, the whirlpool that you can soak in, and On and on and on the list goes, right? The poor are shunned even by their neighbors, but the rich have many friends. Proverbs 19:4, wealth brings many friends, but a poor man's friends deserts him. Proverbs 19:6, many curry favor with a ruler, and everyone is the friend of a man who gives gifts. So when we're talking about friends here, we're talking about genuine friends. Friends who are friends not because of what you can give them, not because of your money, not because of your wealth, not because of something else that they can gain, but because they want to be your friend. And those friends can provide companionship. They can provide love for you. And all of us want to be loved. And some of the men are going, I don't need to be loved by anybody. I'm a man. Well, you want your wife to love you, don't you? I'm hoping that most people that are honest with themselves will say yes. There are some really, really hard people that have been burned in life to the point where they don't treasure friendships or want friendships or companionship or anything else. But we are made as social creatures. Right from the very beginning in the Garden of Eden, God said it is not good for what? Man to be alone. And He made for man the closest of friends, a wife. The closest friend that I have in this world is my wife, Barbara. And that ought to be true of every married couple, I think, that their wife or their husband, their spouse is their closest friend. We are made for companionship. We need companionship. We are social beings, and friends can provide that companionship that we long for. Friends can provide encouragement. There's an interesting story in the book of Job about him and his friends and how the type of counsel that they give to Job during the trials that he goes through in the book of Job. And while we can't cover it all, I'd like to talk a little bit about the beginning of that and the end of that. As Job is suffering from all sorts of physical ailments after the loss of his children, the loss of their lives, the loss of their property, the loss of their cattle and everything else, Job himself is afflicted with boils and sores and diseases. And he's sitting there suffering, and it tells us in Job chapter 2, verse 11, that when Job's three friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar, why couldn't you have friends like Bill, Jim, and Joe, you know? And Zophar the Naamathite heard about all the troubles that had come upon him. They set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. And we criticize these three friends because we know the book of Job and the advice that they give to him, that some of that advice is wrong. But hey, folks, these guys went over to see their friend. They went over to comfort him and to sympathize with him. They're not that bad. They took time out of their day. In fact, not only did they take time out of their day, they take time out of their week. Take a look as we go on how long they spent with him. Verse 12, when they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him because, I guess, of the boils and all the skin lesions that he had. They began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes, which was a sign of mourning in those days, and sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat on the ground with him for how long? 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was. Now, these guys may not have had the best advice for Job, but how many of you have ever had somebody stay in your hospital room for 7 days and 7 nights with you? I think they were pretty decent friends. They sought to do what was right for their friend Job. I'm going to give him an American name whether he wants it or not. But they wanted to help their friend. And I think that even Job recognized that, because at the end of the story, after God had rebuked his friends for their bad advice and straightened not only them out, but also Job, because Job had some wrong thoughts on the whole matter as well. He didn't sin in all of that. He never cursed God. He still continued to be a worshiper of Jehovah, but he had some wrong ideas about some things. And God said, hey, Job, you think you're so smart? You think you're so wise? Take a look at some of the things that I've done in creation. Take a look at some of the creatures like Behemoth and Leviathan that I've made. If you think you're smart, you got a lot to realize about me. My wisdom is far above your wisdom, and my ways are far above your ways. And God sort of straightens out all of the bad counsel in the story of Job. And after that, it tells us in Job chapter 42, verse 10, after Job had prayed for his friends. And it goes on. Job still recognized these guys were his friends. And although they had a little debate over why he was afflicted and why he had the boils and the sores and whether God had forsaken him or hadn't forsaken him and why God might have forsaken him, the bottom line is Job still recognized they're still my friends. We may have disagreed about some things, but I'm praying for them because they're my friends. And they remained his friends. They tried to encourage him in a difficult time in Job's life. Friends can do that. We ought to do that when we are the friend, to try to encourage those who may be at a difficult point in their life. Friends can provide support. Now, this is closely related to number 2 because I'm not thinking simply of financial support. When I say friends can provide support, I'm thinking of support in a number of ways. Support through helping someone physically, support through helping someone financially, support through helping someone emotionally, support through helping someone spiritually. There are numerous ways that we can help someone. Barzillai was an example of that. We already saw in 2 Samuel chapter 17 how he came to the aid of David and his men, and how he and his 2 other chieftains from that area of Mahanaim brought bedding and bowls and articles of pottery and wheat and barley and flour and roasted grain and beans and lentils and honey and curds and sheep and cheese or cheese from cow's milk for David and his people to eat. Friends can provide support. And in this case, it seems primarily to be physical support, financial, if you will, since it cost him money. In an agricultural society, your food and your herds, your sheep, your goats, your cows, that's your finances, right? Out in the Midwest, the corn, that's their livelihood. And with the drought that's going on, and if you've been watching the news, a lot of farmers are concerned in the Midwest about their livelihood. And a lot of the townspeople are concerned about their livelihood. Why? Because their livelihood is tied into the livelihood of the farmers. And so corn is their finances, in a sense. It's what brings in the money. In Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 10, we can see another way that a friend can provide support. It says, if one falls down, his friend can help him up. But pity the man who falls and has no one to help him. You may be saying right now, if things are going well, I can take care of myself and I don't need any friends and I just don't even want to bother. I could care less. If I have friends and I got to be a friend to them and I really don't want to be a friend, I don't want to bother with it. Well, there are times you're going to need a friend in life. And if it's not now, it will come sooner or later. No matter how tough or how strong you are now, someday that will leave you. Someday your strength will fail. Someday you'll be like Barzillai, where you can't see, you can't hear, you can't taste, and you can't do much of anything else. You can't sit in a metal chair too long, right? Because your bones are old and it hurts. And you're thanking God that somebody moved the pews in and the padded chairs. That's what happens as we get old. And we lose that strength. And there are times we need somebody to help us. I always hate to see people who have come to grace for a number of years leave, but there's sometimes when we need to move and go back to where our children are because we need their companionship, we need their love, we need their support, we need their help. That's what family's for. And for those that don't have family, they're going to need friends. Hopefully their family will be their friends to some extent too, but you still need friends, and friends can provide support. Friends can provide guidance. Hushai, we've already talked about Hushai, one of David's counselors, who was also one of his friends, was an example of that. We may not always at first appreciate what our real friends say, but wise people will recognize the value of truthful advice from a caring friend. That's why we read in Proverbs 27, verse 6, these words. Solomon recognized this. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. What kind of wounds does a friend inflict? They're honest with you. Hey, Pastor Dean, you should wear deodorant on Sunday mornings. Well, I do. I just can't wear scented deodorant because I'm allergic to most of it. But a friend will be honest with you, and at first it hurts. Well, who are you to tell me? You ought to take a breath mint once in a while. And somebody gives us advice that we may not like, but hopefully we have the wisdom to realize, hey, this guy's trying to help me out. Pastor Dean, you shouldn't tell jokes about whatever, because it's just not good. Well, you tell jokes. Why can't I tell? And at first it may hurt, but if we're wise, we recognize the wisdom in that. Proverbs 27:9 says, perfume and incense brings tears to my eyes. Here it says, brings joy to the heart, and the pleasantness of one's friends springs from his earnest counsel. Friends can provide guidance. They can help us sometimes at those critical crossroads in our life where we're not quite sure which way to go. And they can step back and oftentimes provide us with a more objective decision than maybe we ourselves can have because we're too close to the situation. Doesn't mean they're always right, but sometimes they are. And sometimes they can provide that viewpoint that we can't have ourselves because we're not completely objective maybe in that type of situation. Friends can provide guidance. Friends can save our job, our reputation, and our family in some situations. Barzillai, again, is an example of that. His actions helped David to keep his kingdom, and how much more? As I mentioned earlier, what would have happened if these three chieftains from east of the Jordan had not come to the rescue of David and his men with food and supplies? Now, we read through that and we think, oh, yeah, they gave him one meal. They had lunch with Barzillai and he's their friend forever. No! They were there for weeks, months maybe even. I don't know exactly how long, but it was a period of time for Absalom. You remember, he had to gather all of the men of Israel, all of the fighting men of Israel had to come first to Jerusalem and then march across the Jordan over to where David was. It takes a while to gather all those troops. And so we're not talking about lunch. Yeah, Barzillai bought him lunch and he gets all this credit. No, we're talking about taking care of these men for some period of time. And had they not had this food, living in the desert, or even living in the town, if nobody would have offered them food and they didn't have the resources to eat, they'd have to go to battle starving to death. No energy, no strength. The whole outcome of this story could be vastly different. Now you say, well, wait a second. God wanted David to be king anyways, and he was going to let him be king no matter what. The Bible even tells us that the forest claimed more lives on that day than the soldiers did. I know that. But the bottom line is it still might have been a different story had they been starving to death. And oftentimes our friends can come to our aid in a big way when we need it most. Now, not always. Not always. Not every friend has the resources that Barzillai had or that other people may have. But sometimes they can. Sometimes it may not even be something big. It may be something little that can help save our job or our reputation or our family. I'll never forget the time that I closed in prayer, and some of you may not have heard. I was preaching on, I think, adultery or something, and as I closed in prayer, Harry remembers it because he was flagging me down wildly at the end of the service, and as I closed in prayer, I thanked the Lord that my wife had cheated on me for the last 32 years of our marriage or something. I meant to say had never cheated on me. And I thank the Lord. I guess a lot of you people knew had not, that I had missed one very, 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 very important word. And I didn't realize I had missed it. And I look up, I said, amen, and I look up and the music starts and everybody starts to get up and leave. And Harry's out there going like this. And I'm looking at him, what's going on? And he comes up to the pulpit real quick and he said, you said you thanked the Lord that your wife's cheated on you for the last 30 years of marriage. I did? Yes! And so I'm tapping the microphone and trying to get whoever was at the soundboard that day to get their attention. And how many of you remember that? A few of you, yeah. Wow, well, what if I would have left you going out of the or what about a visitor on that day? I still wonder if there were any visitors that never came back because, the preacher's thanking God his wife's cheated on him for 30 years? What kind of church is that? My wife has never cheated on me. But man, Harry helped save to some degree. Anyways, I'm hoping most of you knew what I meant. But man, I'm glad he came to my aid. I'm glad he pointed out that I left out a very important word in that closing prayer. And so that's what friends are for. That's what friends are for. That's why we need friends, because there's sometimes we're completely blind to what we're saying or doing or thinking at the time. Sixthly, friends can save our lives. Again, we have an example of that with Hushai the Archite, the counselor of David and David's friend, where as he's back in Jerusalem, sort of serving as a counselor to Absalom, but really with a secret motive, and that is to find out what Absalom's going to do so that he can report back to David, he is able to take the information that he gives to Absalom, that Absalom accepts as the best advice, and relay that through messenger to David so that David knows what's coming. And he can prepare for battle better that way. And so Hushai, and would David still have been successful? I don't know, but boy, I would like to have friends like Hushai who are warning me of what the enemy is planning to do so that I can better prepare. And friends can do that. By the way, Hushai risked his life. When you think about that, he's basically serving as a covert operative back in Jerusalem. Right? He's working with the CIA back there, finding out information from the enemy and relaying it back to who he believes is the rightful king of the country, who was the rightful king of the country. What would have happened had Absalom found out that Hushai was really serving as a spy for David? My guess is he would have lost his head. He went through a great deal of personal risk to help save David's life. That's a friend. Jesus said a friend lays down his life. A true friend will lay down his life for his friends. The seventh thing a friend can do, or the seventh thing that should be done really for friends, is to remember them and reciprocate when possible. Sometimes we can't reciprocate. But if we want to be the friend that we want others to be to us, it's a wise thing to try to reciprocate when possible. In 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 7, we saw that, where David says to Solomon, as David is dying, he says to his son, "But show kindness to the sons of Barzillai of Gilead." Now, we don't know that the sons did anything. We don't even know how old the sons were at that time. I'm guessing they were adults because Barzillai was 80 years old. So I'm guessing they were adults. But David remembers them and he reciprocates by telling his son, "You show them kindness." And we ought to do the same for our friends. And as we do the same for our friends, it helps, I believe, to build deeper friendships. Now, there are some people that the Bible warns us not to be friends with. Because as I talk about this whole topic of friendship, it'd be a little bit of an imbalance. There are people you have to avoid, and I'm not going to go into a whole sermon on this. I'm just going to read a couple of verses, but there are a lot of verses that talk about who you should not be friends with and whom you should not fellowship with. Here's just two in the book of Proverbs. Proverbs 22, verse 24. "Do not make friends with a" what? "Hot-tempered man. Do not associate with one easily angered." Why? Because you tend to become hot-tempered yourself. You tend to become like your friends. And if you're hanging around with people who are always blowing up and always letting their temper get the best of them and always just letting off steam every time they want to let off steam, that affects us. It could affect us in the sense that they may let their steam off on us, right? That may be another reason you don't want to be friends with a hot-tempered man, because he may start beating on you someday. But the other thing is you tend to learn their ways. Proverbs 28, verse 7 says, "He who keeps the law is a discerning son, but a companion of gluttons disgraces his father." And I think that idea there, when it talks about a companion of gluttons, someone who's partaken in their activities. They're there just feasting away and getting drunk, and they become in the process a disgrace to their father. And there are lots of other verses that talk about who not to be friends with. So as we talk about friendship, keep that in mind. There are some people that we're better off not being close friends with. There are also times when friends will let you down. Again, just trying to balance out this whole topic of friendship. There are people who will let you down at times. Don't quit making friends. Don't say, "Well, I've been friends with people and they never reciprocate and they never show friendship back," and phooey on everybody else. That happens sometimes in life. It happened to Jesus. You say, how did it happen to Jesus? Who was Jesus' friend that let him down big time? Judas. You say Judas was his friend? That's what it says in the Psalms, Psalm 41, verse 9, a prophecy about what would happen in relationship to Jesus. It says, even my close friend, whom I trusted, he who shared my bread at the Last Supper, has lifted up his heel against me. Remember, Judas traveled with Jesus for 3 years. He lived with him, he ate with him, he drank with him, he slept with him, he traveled with him, he preached the gospel with him. He kept the money. We also know he was dipping into that, right? From what John tells us that. But he was a friend of Jesus. By the way, I think that's one of the reasons he hung himself. You know, Judas gets a pretty bad rap, and he did a pretty bad thing. He betrayed the Messiah. But then it tells us that he was so overcome, and I'm guessing he was with guilt, because he went out and he hung himself. Why? He knew he betrayed an innocent man. Even if he didn't believe he was the Christ, he was still an innocent man. And apparently, he still felt some sort of friendship with Jesus. And so he killed himself. Don't be surprised if your friends sometimes let you down. Even if they don't mean to, it happens at times. And don't quit making friends just because somebody lets you down. It's just like I tell people, don't quit going to church because you find somebody who's a hypocrite in church. You know, nobody throws away their money because they found a counterfeit $20 bill one time. If you do, throw it my way, okay? The real stuff, not the counterfeit. All right, you find a fake 20, you don't throw every 20 away. You find a fake Christian sometimes, don't throw every Christian away. You find a fake friend sometimes, don't throw every friend away. Don't become so cynical in your mind that you don't want to be a friend or have friends anymore. And then finally, always remember this. There is a friend who will never let you down. You know who that is, don't you? It's Jesus. It's amazing that Jesus calls us his friends. Look at what he says here in John chapter 15, verses 14 and following. This is the Son of God. According to John chapter 1, the creator of the universe and everything that exists. He does not need my friendship, but he desires it. There's a difference, isn't there? He does not need it, but he desires it. And he calls me his friend, and he calls you his friend if you are one of his followers. John 15, verse 14, you are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you to go and bear fruit, fruit that will last. Then the Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. This is my command. Love each other. And I don't believe that this is simply written to just the original 12. But it's written to whoever does what he commands. Verse 14, you are my friends if you do what I command. Is Jesus your friend? Not just your Savior. I'm not asking you, do you know Jesus as Savior? I'm asking you, is he your friend? Is he someone that you go to and you talk with, and you commune with, and you listen to him as he communes with you, and you seek to please him by the way that you live your life and your obedience to his teachings? Because that's what makes us a friend of Jesus. And he desires for us to be his friends. And by the way, God is like David, only better. He doesn't forget his friends. Look at Hebrews 6, verse 10. It says, God is not unjust. He will not forget, and I should have put not in capitals. He will not forget your work and the love you have shown to him as you helped his people and continue to help them. God will not forget you. God will not forget your friendship. God will not forget what you do for him and for his people. Other people may let you down, but God will never let you down. Now, there may be times when you feel like he lets you down. And I say that because I know in Scripture it even warns us of that. In Galatians 6:9 it says, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. There are times when we say, well, I don't. It doesn't seem like God's rewarding me very much for this. It doesn't seem like we're being blessed. We keep trying to do what's right, but man, everything seems to keep going wrong. And hey, God, are you really my friend? Are you really aware of what's going on in my life? Because it seems that you're not even aware of it. The whole problem there is we're looking at God and what He ought to do according to our timetable, rather than according to His timetable. That's why it says, at the proper time. We'd like to be in control of that proper time. But God's the one who's in control of that. And He operates on His timetable. But whatever His timetable is, it's best for us. There are a lot of good reasons for being a friend. There are a lot of good reasons for having a friend. But if you walk out of here today and don't remember anything else, remember that Jesus wants you to be His friend. Let's close with a word of prayer. With heads bowed and eyes closed, the first thing that we must do to be